I'm Mark Williams, author of Uncontrolled Risk, the story about the rise and fall of Lehman Brothers, but most importantly, about the credit debacle, the financial market meltdown that actually impacted all of us from Main Street to Wall Street. As a practitioner of the financial markets, not only an educator, I was able to have a different perspective specifically about the nuts and bolts of the market and how to fix the capital markets so we don't have another repeat of a Lehman crisis. The single most important lesson is that what happened on Wall Street was only part of the problem. It took decades for wild risk-taking to happen on Wall Street, and it was caused by poor policy and weak regulation that was created in Washington, D.C., not Wall Street. Importantly, the book focuses on corporate governance, the importance of the accountability and the role of corporate boards, another set of eyes and ears, and actually a set of hands to be able to evaluate banks. Executives themselves can't run companies without having board and board oversight. When they do, they have a Lehman. What makes this book unique is the fact that I'm using a historical background, taking Lehman from its inception as a growing, prosperous investment bank through the rise and success of our economy to finally the failure of Lehman, and at the epicenter, the failure of our global financial markets. So hopefully what the reader will get from this is the fact that there's lots of very detailed and complicated aspects which caused the financial crisis. But these aspects themselves, when addressed, can reduce the chance of a future Lehman from happening again. Well, Lehman was at the epicenter of the financial crisis. As soon as Lehman went down, the global financial crisis happened. So in a sense, what caused it were many factors, including, for example, weak oversight, policy making, excessive risk-taking on Wall Street. But all these components combined caused Lehman to fail. Lehman didn't fail just because they had one executive that was taking excessive risks or one executive who had large bonuses. Well, what we've learned about the failure of Lehman Brothers is that our economy can only be as strong as our banks. Clearly, a Lehman collapse equaled an economic collapse. So our government itself needs to have tighter regulation and oversight over a vital part of our industry, and that is banking. Unfortunately, the government hasn't taken a strong role, and it needs to take a stronger role in the oversight of investment banks as well as commercial banks in our economy. There's a lot of fundamental changes that need to happen. To start, we need to have tighter regulation on capital requirements for banks. What we do know is that the more capital you have in the bank, the less likely you are to go in default. Secondly, we also have to have better regulation about leverage. Leverage debt, that is taking on more risk, increases the chances of banks failing. So if we have restrictions on leverage, we also have restrictions on the chance of banks failing. There's other changes that need to happen. Banks themselves, the executives, the boards themselves need to be held more accountable for their actions. Too much we've seen banks that have had very passive boards. Boards themselves get paid, they have a role, they have what we call in the legal terms a fiduciary duty. So they need to act and behave in that manner. The government also has an important role, and that is to look forward and say if banks in the economy are intertwined, and that is that banks can only be as strong or the economy can only be as strong as banks, then we need to have public policy long term that actually helps banks be viable and not focus on allowing them to take excessive risk. What makes this book unique is the fact that it is a case study. It uses Lehman to make a point, and the point is that Lehman failed, a very prosperous investment bank, because of excessive risk. Excessive risk happened not just because of Lehman executives, but because of the lack of policy and oversight and regulation within our economy that allowed banks such as Lehman to behave in an inappropriate manner. So I think that is one of the important lessons. The book also takes, in a sense, the reader through time travel from the 1850s all the way up through 2010. And quickly they gain appreciation and understanding of our financial systems, how financial systems work. But most importantly, when a system breaks, what implications that has, not just for Wall Street, but for Main Street. Well, the spark to write this book was really a conversation I had with my 12-year-old daughter, Amelia. She asked me in the middle of the financial crisis, what happened to Lehman, why did it fail? So I spent a year researching and writing this book, and I came to the conclusion I needed to boil it down, take a very complicated topic, and make it so people could understand truly what happened, and that way we could minimize the chance of these events occurring again. So being a practitioner, not only a former executive on a trading floor, but working at the Fed as an examiner, I have a real hands-on understanding of how the financial markets work. In the last 8 years, I've worked at Boston University, focused on the capital markets and lecturing in this area. So it's really the combination of a practitioner's understanding of the markets and also having more of an academic, rigorous background. I think the combination has helped me in regard to this book. This book is less about what happened on Wall Street and more about what did not happen in Washington, D.C. Over a period of decades, poor policy and weak oversight allowed for excessive and wild risk-taking to happen in Washington. Politicians have been very quick at political deflection and pointing a finger at Wall Street, where really the focus should be on Washington, D.C., and why our elected officials, over a period of years, not weeks, months, and days, failed to be good stewards and protect our financial system.